This is a moment in Jewish history. I'm your host, Ben Bresky, and with me today is David Kroyanker, who is an award-winning architect who has written over 30 books about Jerusalem and its buildings and its neighborhoods, and you also won the Yakir Yerushalayim Prize. Mr. Kroyanker, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, now your new book is called Jerusalem That Once Was, and when I walk through Jerusalem, I see all these old buildings, and I also see all the construction that's going on, and I guess that's kind of what your book is about.
Yes, my book is about exactly what the title of the book says and means. These are projects or buildings or neighborhoods which were destroyed or changed over the last 100 years.
Maybe you could tell us a story about one building that's particularly interesting to you.
The building which was destroyed in 1980 and which was of great architectural and historic importance was the Talitha Kumi orphanage, which was built by German nuns in 1873. This was one of the most beautiful buildings designed by architect Konrad Schick, the German, who was a very prominent, or probably the most prominent architect in the city during the 19th century. It was destroyed in order to build a new building on the site, which for many years was the Hamashbir Latzachan department store.
Well, I remember buying clothes at the Mashbir department store. I never actually saw the original building, but I've many times passed by on King George Street where they have bits and pieces on display on the street, including the original sign and clock.
Yeah, that's, these are remnants of the historic building which was destroyed and which created a great argument at the time whether this should have been done or not, but I supported this project because otherwise there would be no remnant whatsoever for the most beautiful and important building in the history of Jerusalem's architecture.
It's an interesting question about what should the feel of Jerusalem be and which buildings should get saved and which buildings aren't worth it to save.
Well, this is a very general question. You have to estimate the value of a building, its historic and architectural value, at the time when it is designated for destruction. I can't say now in advance, which building should be preserved or not preserved. This is a very general question, which is very difficult to answer.
I guess that's true, yeah. Now, I read in a previous interview where you talked about architecture and building new neighborhoods in Jerusalem as a form of Zionism, because most of the time when I think of the Zionist pioneers, I think of the farmers and the kibbutzniks, but is this also a form of Zionism?
During the mandate period, there were 4 garden city suburbs built in Jerusalem. The most important one was Rechavia, the other one was Talpiot, Beit Vegan, and Beit HaKerem in the western part of the city. These were 4 garden city suburbs which were designated for the Jewish population. And the most prominent architectural style in Rechavia was the Bauhaus style. Some of the buildings which were built at the time in the 1920s and the beginning of the 1930s were destroyed, and this is something which we can only be sorry about.
And what are your thoughts about today's Jerusalem? I mean, is there a place for the big modern buildings and the skyscrapers?
Look, the British government tried to introduce 3 major by-rules: low buildings, construction only in natural stone, and keeping the valleys open. Now, all these have changed dramatically since the British left in 1948, and now you can see the skyscrapers, which are mostly built out of glass and not out of natural stone, and the valleys in which many new roads were built after the establishment of the State of Israel.
And what do you think about the light rail, now that they're doing construction on the new lines?
The Rekevet Kala changed Jerusalem and made the city into a more modern city, which helps to develop new buildings from Har Herzl in the west to the north in Pisgat Ze'ev. I think this is a great and very important decision, which was made about 15 years ago.
Yeah, because I understand it was controversial when it was first proposed.
Everything is controversial. Everything is controversial with Jews. I presume you know that, right?
Yeah, I've heard that before.
No, it's not true. I mean, the basic decision to build the light rail, almost everyone agreed to that.
And maybe you could talk a little about yourself, where you grew up and what Jerusalem was like when you were a child.
Well, I'm now 85, going on to 86. I was born in Jerusalem in 1939. I served in the army in the paratroopers. I studied in London at the Architecture Association School of Architecture. After graduating, I worked for architect David Resnick in Jerusalem, and later I worked for the municipality. And for many years, I'm a freelance architect, working mainly on the books I wrote on researching Jerusalem's architectural heritage. That's it, more or less.
And what neighborhood did you grow up in?
In Rehavia.
Oh, okay. So I guess that's something you're really familiar with.
I'm very familiar with, yes. The fact that I was born there doesn't make it more familiar to me than many other neighborhoods in which I lived over the years, like Talbiyah and other many neighborhoods.
And in your new book, you talk about how David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of the state of Israel, proposed that maybe they should just get rid of the walls of the old city after the Six-Day War in 1967.
Yes, but this was something which Ben-Gurion said in 1967. He didn't really mean it. It was a sort of a metaphor for explaining his wish to join the two parts of the city, the eastern part with the western part. He didn't really mean to destroy the old city wall.
Now that you're talking about it, I'm thinking, was the idea of living outside of the walls of the old city back in the 1800s, was that controversial?
Well, no, it wasn't. It wasn't really controversial because the density of the Jewish population in the Jewish quarter of the old city was such that Jews found themselves having to establish new neighborhoods outside the old city. And the first neighborhoods were built around 1860, like Nachlat Shiv'ah and Mea Sha'arim and all these neighborhoods. So this is something which was very much determined by the density of the Jewish population in the Jewish quarter. It was a necessity.
Okay, we've been talking to David Kroyanker. Thank you very much. I've been reading your articles for a long time, and I'm glad I finally got the chance to talk to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
This has been a moment in Jewish history. Thank you to David Kroyanker, and you can check out his website at kroyanker.co.il, kroyanker.co.il. And you can check out my website, benbresky.substack.com, for past shows and any questions or comments. Thank you to all the listeners, and shalom.